G'day Bifrosters. I don't even know what to say about this. I've been working on it so long. Diffuse lighting in Bifrost. This is the LightBox system. I designed this tool to work with smaller gaming studios who need to bake lights and ambient occlusion in a hurry. It's a diffuse lighting generator, so it doesn't do any specular, doesn't do any GI, does do a reasonable fake of a GI. It will project diffuse light and color your models accordingly on the vertices. So you no longer have to bake your ambient occlusion out to a texture and reload it in your game engine. You can take this across to a game engine as vertex data. It's got several light systems. I'm going to take you through a setup in a minute. This is just the splash piece to show you things, but it does shadows reasonably accurately, depending of course on the resolution of your model. So it's all based on how many points you have. There's also a couple of things in here to help those low poly models look a bit better. And I'm also going to demonstrate how we can use this to save out light rigs. So if you had exactly the same scene, but a different giant walking robot, you could change the giant walking robot, which technically is a battle mech for those of you that are screaming at me right now. I'm looking at you. Yes, you. You know who I'm talking about. So yeah, this was put together to stop you having to render in Turtle or Rhino or Maya or whatever it is when you wanted to bake out some lights quickly. It outputs both to point color on the mesh, which means it's vertex color on an FBX. It also outputs to USD, but there's still a couple of hiccups with the USD. I'll take you through a USD output at some point, probably in a separate video, and show you what I have to do to get USD to work. But basically, this is what LightBox does. So let's turn on some things so we can see. There are two spotlights in that street lamp. There is a directional light back out here. And you can, of course, change the lighting reasonably quickly. Some lights are slower than others, depending on the math they have to do. Directional lights are pretty fast because they're not that complicated. Area lights, for example, are very, very slow because they have to do a lot of things. Not so slow that you can't use them, but not real time or instant either. This one also has a Skydome in it, but I'm going to take you through a light setup in a minute. One of the things I did want to show in the overview is we can turn off all lighting and just get our ambient occlusion. So if you wanted to output your ambient occlusion, you could output this now, and you would get color per vertex of red, green, and blue are set to about 0.3. And then your ambient occlusion would be in your A channel. So your RGBA, it would be in your A channel. So if you just wanted to use it for ambient occlusion, this is the setup you'd use. You'd probably not want to plug in any lights, and you just want to output the ambient occlusion. Of course, everything has settings. So those are ambient occlusion settings in there. Those are your display settings. They're pretty simple. Enable, disable, change how much blur, and a USD output. And each light has its own settings as well. But we'll go through that. And that's probably the intro, so maybe instead of going through that in just a minute, we should go through that now. Here is the file before anything happened to it. Now you can see that I've got several bits of geometry here that we can test on. We could have a look at this guy. We could have a look at different mech. I'm kind of into mechs at the moment because I bought and started playing MechWarrior 5, so you'll have to forgive me. Really, they're just big, complex models with different hard and soft normals, and it means that I can cover most of my bases. And I've got the cyclic in the back, which is obviously still visible in the outliner. So let's just go and hide everything we don't need to see in Maya. Disconnect that again, and there we go. So what LightBox is designed to do is provide lighting and AO information on one object, so one asset. I've just put the cyclic in the back so that we can see shadows working and things like that. To do that, I've had to merge the two into one object so that the LightBox system will do what it says. So let's get it started really, really quickly. First thing you always want to drop down is a display. Your LightBox display is your output and display module. It's what's going to show you what's happening, and it's also what enables you to output it. Obviously, I can turn those off. There's nothing coming in right now, but if I put a mesh into it, everything's going to go black. We'll just kill the output for now because we're coming out through the diagnostic here. The reason everything's going black is you have no information coming into the display. There's no lighting contribution, there's no AO contribution. If I turn off the lighting and turn off the AO, you see I'm just getting a medium gray. Let's get some lighting down. First thing we'll put down is a Skydome. What this does is creates an enormous dome of a radius of about 600 around your entire model, and then uses the normal information from that to light your models. Everything in Lightbox works off the diffuse equation. So if you jump into the node, you can have a look in the apply lighting of any of the nodes, and you're going to find the light equation. And what the light equation does is bring in the point normal, and that point normal is coming in from mesh normals. And then you are making a ray to the light. So you've got a light direction. The light direction in the case of the Skydome is the normal of the Skydome. You also bring in the intensity. And all it's doing is a dot product between the unit light ray and the point normal that's coming in. This bit makes sure that it does not go below 0, because negative light isn't a thing. Can be a thing, but it's not a thing here. And then that's multiplied by the intensity. That's basically it. That's showing me how much light is falling on the surface and then from what direction. That's the basis of all of this system, is the diffuse. But enough technical stuff, let's hook up our Skydome. So you need to put your mesh in first. There's always an input mesh somewhere. Without anything going into it, it's not going to show you anything. And then when you're using Lightbox display, you can have the light data into the lighting contributions. You've also got the raw data coming out, should you want to use it. This is really good if you wanted to light something like strands, which it will do, not as well as it could, but it will, and it's going to get better. And this is just the first release. I'm sure everybody will come back with changes they want to see. But straight away, we need to see what's going on. So let's turn on the lighting, change the background color, and you can see there's some dim lighting going on there already. Now this is the Skydome, based on the Skydome settings. First off, we'll turn our intensity up so we can see what's going on. Oh, it's a little bit too much. So you can see you're getting a reddish underlight, light coming up from the bottom, which corresponds to this. If I was to change this to an orange, like it was walking through fire, you could see that that's lighting upwards because that light is coming from the bottom. Because this is a Skydome and it's basically a very, very cheap and nasty effect for global illumination, it isn't casting any shadows. And that means that the light is passing straight through this bottom area and just coming straight up. So our intensity, in the middle, you've got a horizon light. I'm going to bump that right up. And you can see that we're getting a lot more light contribution from that. So you change the amount of the light contribution you've got here, and again, have a much brighter sky. You can do this kind of thing. The diagnostic tab on the Skydome will actually show you what the dome's doing. And that's what the dome looks like right now. So this is what it's casting light from. It's essentially a very, very cheap mesh light, which is providing light down into the center of itself. Really just a Bifrost sphere with its normals reversed. You have some settings. You can change the resolution of the Skydome, so you can actually have more light input coming in if you want. So if we took that to say 128, you can see that you get many more divisions on your sphere. This is probably a very subtle thing. See the light just change very slightly. The other thing you've got is horizon bias, so you can move the horizon and the way that the ramp works. So you can see here that the ground is, if you're negative, the ground has got more weight. And if you're positive, as you get more positive, the horizon gets more weight. The weight is the overall input. So it's kind of like the intensity, but what the intensity does is part of the equation, whereas what the weight does is it multiplies the results. So I can say, like, I only want that much Skydome. Or I want the Skydome to be that intense. And you can see in this one, the Skydome actually changes. And in this one, it doesn't. And that's our first light. So let's turn off the diagnostic so we don't have to look at that. What I'd like to do is I'll just have no light contribution coming from below. So nothing bouncing up off the ground. If you wanted to, you could just do a little bit like that. Maybe a little bit more than that. A little from more from the horizon and a lot more from the zenith, and you're getting something like this. And that's our Skydome. Now, Skydomes don't cast shadows, and the shadows that they do cast, because they're such a diffuse light, are ambient occlusion. So let's get that in next. So we'll go for Lightbox AO. Ambient occlusion is heavy. It does an awful lot of math in here. So the speed that this thing goes at is absolutely dependent on what its resolution is set to and how many points you have in your mesh. This mesh, you'll have to trust me because I don't want to turn everything off and on, but this mesh is around about 40,000 points is what it's working on. So you'll see here, if I plug in the ambient occlusion and then plug in the display, nothing much is going to happen yet because we turned it off. Now we're waiting for it to calculate the ambient occlusion. And there it is. So what I've put in here is a mechanism to speed that up, compute on frame here. And what this is basically doing is it's telling Bifrost, when this is on, to only do the ambient occlusion calculations on this frame. What happens then is if I go out here, it's not going to calculate that ambient occlusion anymore. I can show you this by taking our actual mech and moving it. And you can see the ambient occlusion it left here. It's taking its own occlusion with it, which is great because if you're just working on a single asset without the background, then you're done. It's good. You can start adding more lights. You can do all kinds of things. But if you make any changes to the ambient occlusion, like for example, I think that this is probably just a little bit heavy right now. The radius is too high. So I'll take that down to 5 and you can see that nothing's changed and nothing will change until I come back to the frame that I told it to calculate on and I'll give it a minute to do its thing. And there you go. So it's recalculated the ambient occlusion and now I can jump back off that frame and again do the work I need to do. I'm not sure whether you guys require an explanation of what ambient occlusion does, but really quickly what this does is it takes every point in the mesh, it shoots out 32 random rays in a hemisphere along the normal of that point, and it tries to see what they hit. If it hits something, subtracts that much from the model. So it makes it that much darker. It's got a search radius of 5, and it's also got a minimum radius so that they don't hit the mesh themselves. So it just means that if you start at a point and then look for the first collision, you're going to get its own point unless it has a minimum radius. This says 0, and underneath, back in the hood, it's like 0.002. Infinite radius will tell it to look along that ray until it hits something. So it's not cutting off the radius at all, it's just going forever. And then normalize, which is by default on, will change all of the results to a 0 to 1 and allows you to adjust it with this graph here. The reason I'm not demoing this is because of how slow it is. Feel free to have a look at it yourself. And also, as with all of my compounds that I made after a certain date, he said qualifying himself, there is info in here which will give you a little bit more of an explanation. If you're still really stuck, sing out. You should know where to find me by now if you're watching this video. Cool. So we've got our dome on, we've got our ambient occlusion on. And maybe I want to do a bit of a sunlight. So let's do a directional light. LightBox Directional. This is where we start getting into a little bit more of the slightly more complex stuff going on. The reason for that is that to keep this as fast as I possibly can, if you have a look inside here, this is pre-calculating shadows. So before it does any of the baking of the light with the light equation and all of that, and in this case it's got attenuation, it's got all kinds of stuff going on. It's calculating where the shadows are going to be first, so it only has to do it once. So for that, I'm going to need an accelerator, and the accelerator you're going to need, I'm going to add an accelerator now, and the one I'm using is the closest accelerator. And we just plug our geometry into that. We plug our accelerator into our accelerator port, our geometry that we're lighting into our input mesh. So what I'm going to do is I've put in a system that allows you to use locators if you're using any Bifrost, but locators easily if you're using Bifrost 2.6 or better, to set up just a little icon that'll give you some feedback on screen. So I'm just going to create a locator like that. Let's be sensible and call it Directional 01 with the right spelling, Val, that would be nice. And then you can just drag your locator straight in and you get the locators transformed by default. Another Lightbox node, Lightbox locator transform. And what this is going to do is take that matrix, and in here, yes, you need the VHH set to do it. In here, it gets matrix to SRT, gets the translation, and then converts the quaternion to a forward direction. So we need to put this in our icon position. So it's going to show us, when we turn it on, look, it's going to show us an icon, and we need to put the direction in the light direction. Some lights need direction and position, spotlight, directional light, for example. Others don't. Point light just needs a position. So once we turn that on, and let's lift this guy up a bit. And this is another little quick trick for working with this system quickly, is if I don't plug this light data in, it's not doing any of the calculations. So I can set up where I want my light coming from. I can go into my directional. I can set up my colors. And I'm going to have a bit of a guess at what sunlight color should be. I know I can probably get that off the web, but I'm going to try something like that. You can see the icon is changing color to match the light color, or at least an approximation of it. Don't don't be getting on me about accuracy. The icon's controlled by the proxy here, so you turn the proxy on and off. Then when we're sort of happy with what we've got, we just plug it into the lighting contributions and it adds that contribution to everything else. And you can see immediately we've now got a shadow. We've got the light contribution coming in, which is starting to make me think that the Skydome is possibly a little bright. But then the brighter the Skydome, I guess the closer it is to noon, and the dimmer the Skydome, the closer it is to twilight. So we've got all that kind of stuff going through. I'm going to really quickly just, I guess so you guys can pick up on it and show. I'm going to move him back into the middle and go and recalculate my ambient occlusion. And there we go. So we get off the frame that we're caching on, so we're not trying to push through our ambient occlusion calculations all the time. And you can see that my directional light is casting shadows on the object itself and shadows on the background. Shadows, because this is color per vertex, the shadows are corresponding to each vertex. So if you come over to the display, you can see here I've got a median blur built in. So if I turn the median blur off, set the iterations to 0, that is the light information per point, the raw data. You can see it's pretty horrid, it's pretty jagged and manky. To fix that, I put in a median blur, and a median blur is just an average. It's like an average vertices, but for the colors. And I can now make these shadows as blurry or as sharp within reason as I like. Find 4 for this scale is pretty good. This is all about light baking, and if I was going to bake this and send it out into the game, then I'd be really happy, as long as my sun direction didn't change, but you know, we can work things out from that later. Just noticing that my light is now inside my mech, so let's just move that. Because it's a sun, it's basically a sunlight. It's an infinite light, and it's always parallel, then it doesn't really matter where it is, but it's good to see it. I can turn on the direction of the light rays, and you can see how it's building the shadows. This is quite a good diagnostic tool to check to see if your lights are working. I mean, if you subtract all of the talking, then we've really quickly and really easily built, you know, I'm not a great lighting person, but a great sunlight rig. You can do all kinds of Bifrost stuff now. This is still very procedural. So I can get a more sort of noon light. My Skydome, brighten that up a bit so it looks a lot more like a noontime and less red. If I wanted to, I can go to the directional here. And I can literally start pulling the saturation down, so you've only got a hint of yellow. You can do all kinds of things like that. But that's a really, really fast light rig, and it's all set up and ready to go. You can now, if you want, give it an asset name. That's the name of the mesh in the USD that you're going to build with this, and give it an output directory. This is my USD directory. It's got all kinds of interesting stuff in it. And then turn that on and it will save it as a USD file. There are some issues with the USD, still working on it. I'm going to do a separate video that shows you how to get a USD file out into either Unity or Unreal without normal hardness problems, which is what I'm fighting at the moment. I can, at this point, save this rig. And the way to save this rig is literally by grabbing all of that. Probably just one more thing before we go. I'm going to take out my background. So I've just got my object here. And that's looking pretty good. I'm just giving it an eyeball check. Yeah, it's looking pretty cool. So now if I want to output this, all I have to do is hook up the output of this to an output, and you lose all of your information straight away because this is all stored on the points. This is color per vertex right now. So Bifrost 2.6 introduced this, which is awesome. Right click on your output and go create Maya mesh, and it's just going to make one there like that. So let's make sure that we're only looking at that. Select it, isolate. So again, you're not seeing much right now. It's not looking great. It's just gray and doing its thing. What I need to do is select that mesh, go to mesh display and go toggle display color. You can see it's gone semi-transparent, but the lighting information is there. The reason it's gone semi-transparent is because we output ambient occlusion, and ambient occlusion goes into the alpha channel of the color per vertex. I turn that off. Yeah, you can see. Now this, you can see the normals have gone very fluffy, and the reason for that is that this is just exporting the lighting information. This is just the color per vertex. It's not outputting your face vertex normals or the indices of your face vertex normals. That's for whatever you want to bring it into to do. So your game engine or whatever it is you're doing this for. What this is all about is just getting that color out. And you can see here, it's got the lighting color baked onto the vertices exactly how we wanted it. And at this point, I could just take this and go File, Export Selected to FBX. Fill in all of the things that you guys know more about than I do, because I'm still learning how to do this game stuff. Edit your presets and whatever it is you do for FBX, and then you could load it into a game engine. That's how the system works. And I'll just take that off. So this merged is no longer working. The reason you've got normal information here is because the display runs it through a shader, and the shader is providing the array information, which I'm not, because it's much better for your game engine to do that, to actually calculate the normals itself and things like that. Probably even get these guys a little smoother. All right, so, and yeah, last thing, of course, is what happens if we want to make this a rig? Well, we just need to grab everything that we've set up. I include the merge geometry because it's got a fan-in array here. You don't have to. And we make a group out of that, and we can call this Sunshine Rig. And of course, you can put controls on the outside and change things from out here if you want to as well. This is just what I would do to make this into a rig to use for other assets. All that's coming in right now is the asset itself, and that's being fed into here. I mean, if I was going to do this super properly, I would probably make that, I'd output that one. And delete that one. So it's bringing the array in instead. Of course, it doesn't have anything packed into that just yet, so we'll just go fan in. And we can put in this guy here. He's looking pretty good. Go back in here, and we're not getting any output out. Turn that off for now. Oh, that's our icon up there. This is our display. Let's turn our ambient occlusion back on. Now, it's not going to do much here because it's going to try and calculate it. And in this case, it got it right. But this is something I want to show you really, really quickly. So we've got our ambient occlusion back on. We're all good. Go back, wait for it to calculate. There we go. And just jump forward to a random frame. So now I've got a sunshine rig, and if I wanted to change that sunshine rig for a different asset, really all I'd have to do is plug that asset in. Now, it's immediately going to turn up broken, and the reason it's going to turn up broken is that it has cached the ambient occlusion information. So all you need to do is go back to the frame you cached on. It'll do the math, it'll take a little while, and then it'll be sorted. Then it'll sort itself out, and you can move the frame off, and then you've got the correct ambient occlusion coming through here. So yeah, that's pretty much doing the business. So now you've got this one compound that you can just plug different attributes into. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, I need to show you what lights you actually have to work with and how to put them together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this back to what we had. So let's go through and quickly set up something that'll show off our lights for us, yeah? So I'm okay with this guy. And again, display, mesh, everything goes funny. Everything goes funny because firstly, that is still on. Turn that off. This guy's got lighting and AO, but there's nothing coming into either. I'll turn off the AO for now, and we'll do a Skydome. Nothing's coming through because there's nothing plugged into the Skydome. So we plug something into the Skydome, and again, we're back in business. I like to use the Skydome because it's quick, instant, globalish lighting. Globalish, very globalish. Push our intensity up a little bit, not too much though. Let's get another directional. Of course, as soon as I say I'm running through this quickly, I make a bunch of mistakes that slow everything down, and I have to go and fake it in editing. Oh well. All right, we've got nothing coming out the directional yet. We need our locator. Now, the lighting contribution here just takes any Lightbox compound that has a light data output. And all a light data output is an object that's carrying the light data. There's no mesh data in there. There's no anything else. It's just carrying the light data for you. And it's put together for this system. So we're kind of back to where we were. We've got a Skydome and a Directional. We need some ambient occlusion. Now we've got some deep and heavy ambient occlusion going on. So maybe the radius needs to come down. I try and spend as little time on the ambient occlusion calculation as possible because it takes a long time to do. So once I've got that somewhere where I like it, and that's looking pretty good for a nighttime shot, we've got nice dark shadows and things. I will make sure compute on frame is on, and I will just literally go forward one frame. Now I can do my light direction change. So if we wanted to have a bit of moonlight, or if we wanted to have some up lighting, which is of course getting shadowed by the floor. You get the idea. Cool, so first off, we'll show our street light. Now I'm going to put in some lights coming from the street light, and for that I'm going to use area light because area lights are really, really complicated and it's a good thing to show you. So we'll do a Lightbox area light, and this one's a bit different. You can see it still needs the input mesh, but you've got two matrices you can bring in here. An area light is basically a geo light as long as that geo's a plane. So let's create a plane. You can create it in Maya, so I can just create a Maya plane here. What the area light would like to have is the matrix for that plane, which means we need to go out to the node editor. We need to make sure we've only got our Bifrost there. That, and then we just bring in that plane we just made, drop that in. We need the shape. And we're going to need an input for the Bifrost. And we're back after Maya crashing. So maybe that wasn't the best idea. Let's do it another way. So what I've done here, we're still working with the area light. I'm just going to delete that. That was my test. And delete the polyplane. So before we do anything else, we'll hook up our mesh just so this gives us some results when we wanted to. And the easiest way to get a matrix in without crashing is to put in the input. Connect up the thing you want inputted into it. So this wants a matrix. We go to we need a plane first, right? So we created my plane. Also, you can create them in Bifrost if you want to. A little harder to get the matrix that way, but hey, if you know what you're doing, you know what you're doing. So I'm just going to make this a really simple plane. There it is. The important thing to remember here is that it's going to project light like an area light along its positive normal. So you need to make sure the normal's facing the right way, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I'm going to use this to project from this light. So we'll go along here, get this organized and lined up roughly, bring it up here, focus on it. Boom. There it is, nicely focused. This plane is going to become what generates our light. So I'm just going to try and center that roughly as best I can. Let's get the rotation kind of close. Something like that, except it's going to need to be that way because of what I said about the normal. So I'll do that. Area lights aren't going to be very happy to try and get a different shape. But now I've got that, and I need to make sure that it's hooked in here. So we just need to go to our node editor real fast and drop in our plane. There we go. I just need the world matrix out of here, and that goes into Maya geoplane matrix, and that's it. Never need to look at the node editor again until we do the next light. Okay, so that's really all we need to plug into the area light. We can take a look at it now. And you can see it's giving you the white rectangle with an arrow. The white because that's the color of the light. Change that to a blue, it's going to change, but we actually want white. 111, all good. There it is. It's a little offset, possibly because I didn't freeze my transforms, but that's okay, it's close enough. And we can also just hide the plane, but still move it, so we can get things a little bit more accurate. So this is going to create a plane that's going to project light in that direction. Let's hook it in and see what happens. So drop that in the lighting contribution like anything else. You can kind of see a tiny bit lighter area there. So let's just pop the weight up to 10. And there you go. So this is what an area light does, is it projects in that shape. It's designed for things like fluorescent lights, or if you want to do some funky film noir stuff. There will be both a strand light and a geo light coming. I just have planned them and not built them yet because I've been trying to get this out for a while, and this is the basic set. Let's call that one downloadable content, but for free, you know. But you can see what it's doing just by its results. There's a band of light. We can go fully crazy with it, make it very bright. And again, you've got all kinds of nice issues. But what I wanted to show you about the area lights is a couple of things. So this is, put the area light focus to 0. And if you want to see what the area light's doing, you turn on the diagnostic. And that's literally how it works. Right now, this is creating a high resolution plane and projecting from each point on that plane. And the resolution controls how many points are in that plane. So if I take that to 10 or 5 even, you can see that these are the rays that it's casting to calculate the light. Now there's 2 points to an area light. It calculates the hits and then an area around the hits to do its lighting on. This might change a little later because I think I need to build attenuation into area lights, which I haven't yet. For now, this is kind of how it's working. That radius around the hits that it's going to light is controlled by area light spread. So if I take that to 0.2, you can see that shrinks, and I can take that down to the point where the radius around these hit points is so small that it's really just lighting the vertices that it finds. So there's a few things we can do here. First thing we can do is we can change our focus. So this spreads out. And you can see how some of the verts are lighting up and some aren't. That's because our radius is very, very small. I can change that up and you can see it just picks up more and more hits as it goes. And you can set that to whatever works for you. You know, you can do something like this, or you can go all the way out. This gives you a little bit more control. We'll go with 0.5. And you can also up the resolution and you'll get a better hit right there because of the radius between the hits. It's not the best way to do it. I know it's not the best way to do it. Look, now you can also shrink the radius so that you can actually have it come and point down to a laser focus if you like. But that's all that the area light focus is doing. It's changed how spread out the rays are, whereas the spread is how much of the collision mesh it affects. Like I said, this is the most complicated and the most experimental of these lights. But above all that, it doesn't really look like a street light. That's more like something you would get with Spotlight with a gobo. So what I'm going to do is build this out of spotlights and see if I can get a better idea. But I wanted to show you how the area light works. By the way, if you want to move this around with its object, then you just need to select its object. Basically parent the plane to the object, and then you should be able to just move the light and the object as you like. And Bifrost will just catch your light up quite happily. So you can get closer to this guy, you can do further back, you can do all kinds of sort of position-based lighting stuff as much as you like. So I'm not going to use the area light. I'm going to turn the area light off by disconnecting it. I'm going to leave it there so we can all look at it and have fun. And we'll use a spotlight. Again, same as before. Mesh goes in, accelerator goes in. Because the spotlight has a direction and a position, then we're going to need our locator transform here. Position goes into spotlight position, direction goes into spotlight direction, and you are set again. There you go. We have an icon for you to look at, work with. So that's the color of the light, the angle of the spot. Color also reflects the intensity. So grab that locator. I'm just going to rotate in the X 90 degrees, minus 90 degrees. Cool. And we'll go to the front view for this. And again, I haven't hooked up this light yet because this is fast. So I'm going to put him there. And then I'm going to give him a bit of a rotate. all of that's set up. Let's plug our light in and see what kind of result we get. Stock standard little spotlight. So again, we want these street lights to be quite bright. Let's push that out. We can maybe change our cone angle a bit, which isn't going to matter down there, because you can see how the penumbra works with the cone. It spreads it out once you get it past a certain area. But I'm going to go with 45 anyway. We can change the way how soft or how hard our light is. If you make it really hard like that and then change your cone angle, you can see how your cone angle works. But this is quite a sensitive little thing. I tend to leave it on about 0.1, gives me a nice spotlight. And that's pretty much got the first one set up. I don't think that's looking quite right because it's too much of a spot. And I mean, I could use this to shadow. I could also build some shadow, like shadow planes here that weren't visible to the camera, but Bifrost would shadow quite nicely. That's just another way to do it. Anything you hook up in here, you'd have to merge it with this. It will cast shadows on itself. It will cast shadows on any other objects in the scene. But I'm going to leave that for you to play with. But what I really want to do is I want to put another spotlight with exactly the same setting about here. Now, I could go through the whole thing again, bring in Locator, bring in Transform, hook it all up, output it, see how it goes. Or I take this guy, copy and paste him. So I've got a second spot, which is hooked up to the same stuff, which is great. I want the direction, but I need the position to change. And I don't need to change the locator position to do this. I can just change it in Bifrost procedurally. So I can just add to this vector. And apologies to all of you who know what I'm going to do, but hey, that's the wrong vector to add to. That was the direction. Apologies to myself for being an idiot. So we're just adding this guy. Doesn't matter if we add him before or after, and we just plug that into the position. And now, really, really easily, I can just take this guy and I can go, okay, so I want him to be about there, and I want him to be back up a bit. That's the wrong way. Back up about here, too far, come out. Cool. So that was really, really quick. So now, if I move that locator back in Maya, I'm going to control both of those spotlights. And then, same if I rotate it. It just gives me a little bit more control here, and the light is adding to it. So if we plug this dude in, adds a little bit more light and a bit of an elongated shape, which is great. Now let's make sure that we keep some of these two attributes exactly the same. And the way I'm going to do that, and let's fallout distance is a good one, create a value node, just like you would for anything else. Plug it into both of the compounds. Then I can change my value node to say I want you to fall off a bit further. The fall off distance is basically the attenuation of the direction of the light. In the case of a spotlight, the penumbra response is the attenuation away from the center. And this is set up to be an inverse square relationship with a limit. So this is supposed to be the point at which that fades off to 0. It's not quite accurate yet, but it's not bad. And these guys cast shadows. So what I want to do here is full off distance. I'm happy for it to be quite a bright spotlight, so I'll go up to 20. So it would fall off to 0 down here somewhere. And then all that remains to be done is we can start playing with our intensity if we want. So that's getting one of the lights quite intense. We can change our penumbra responses so they're more or less faded out from the center. We can change our weight. We can do this separately on both, or with this system we can do it on both. And again, if I want to move this with the light, there's my street light. All I'm going to do is drop the locator into the street light as a parent. So I move the street light, then off we go. And you can see that the spotlights are producing shadows back here. So the leg is being shadowed as well as the foot. And like I said, if I wanted to add a couple of planes in there to shadow it, I could. And then to get that to shadow, so this is, at this point in time, this is a Maya object. I should just be able to drop it in here as a plane shape and add it to my merge geometry at the beginning. Probably do something like that. Make it a bit bigger, and you're just starting to cut off one edge so you guys can see what I'm doing there. It's just artificially shadowing. It's a gobo for those spotlights more than anything else. You can also like rotate that a bit, get a bit more of a response up on the foot, and yada yada yada. So yeah, that's just a rough. I mean, clean, just out that way a bit. Yeah, and again, I've put it in street light group, so if I move the street light, the light behaves accordingly. But you get the idea. Now, what if I didn't like that? What if I mean, I do. I'm going to get rid of my shadow plane here just to speed things up a little bit. I do like it, but what if I wanted to try something else? And then we've got to go to the last main light we haven't looked at. So let's just connect our spots and turn off their icons so they don't distract us. I'm going to put in a point light. Now, point lights are a little heavy, and point lights are a little heavy because they shoot light out in all directions, and they do a lot of it. So I am pretty happy with our locator here. That's going into our spotlight position, which, just to remind you, that's that guy. So let's use this for our point light. Since our two spots are turned off, we'll leave it hooked up. It doesn't really matter. So we just need a point light position for there. And we can turn that on to see that our icon's working, and it is. Now we can move our locator quite happily to just be a point light there. Now remember, this is going to shoot light out in all directions. And something I forgot to show you, I'll turn this on. Okay, this is showing us the hits from the spotlight. Basically. Turn that off again so that everybody's happy. We're going to do the same thing with the point light. If I turn this on, it's going to show, well, once I've got everything I need plugged into it, of course, it's going to show me that the light rays that it's using to calculate the point light. So that's a good start, and we need our accelerator as well to get our shadow calculations. Let's get that in. And there you go. You can see that those rays are all pointing towards the point light, which is cool. Let's have a look at what the point light does. We'll just turn that off for now. Most of them have a diagnostic like that you can look at. Turn on our point light. There we go. We've got a nice old diffuse point light that's casting shadows and doing stuff that it should do. Again, has the controls. It's got a long fall off distance. Let's take that back to 15. It's dim a bit. It's not going to make a good street light, but it's just something I wanted to show you. We could also use this for, you see how much slower a point light is? You can use this for just highlighting, stuff like that. I can take my locator and just kill its rotation for now. And then take this and pop it up here. We can use it for all kinds of things that we want to do, but it's essentially being a point light, which is great. And like I showed you earlier, you can get this out to whatever it is you want to get it out to. FBX, USD, whatever as long as your export contains color per vertex, you've got this information in your game engine. It's fast. It's not as fast as it could be, but it will be as fast as it could be. And really, I really want to hear from anybody who uses it, who can break it, who thinks I can do something better, who has suggestions for next things. What I'd really like to do with it is help out any game artists out there that are trying to render out their light information, their AO information. I'd like to provide a faster example. That is pretty much everything for this video because, oh, no, I lie. There is one more light. And you can see what lights you've got by just looking at LB. So what we don't have is the ambient. And this works exactly like a Maya ambient light does. You put in your mesh and you put in wherever, like you can put in a locator if you want to. I'll put in this one because it's, it's the one we've got right now. Just goes into icon position. And once we switch off our point and switch on our ambient, you can see a different icon turns up. Doesn't matter where this is, because all an ambient light does is adds a number to every point in every point that's coming in on this mesh here. Okay, so we'll hook this up there. See, it got just marginally brighter there. So let's make this a bit more obvious, shall we? Let's just go We'll take those to 0. Get a very slight reddish tinge. We'll multiply that by 10. And you can see everything's just gone red. It's just added this number to all of the other colors. It's left the shadow there. That comes from the directional light over here. I can turn my 2 spots back on, see what that looks like. Oh, and the other thing you can do too, if you want to make like just little sub setups, you can quite happily build an array. Plug these 2 spotlights in it. This becomes a spotlight array, and then just drop that into this main array as well. And everybody will be happy. I believe we moved our locator. We did, so that's why it's doing that. Yeah, but all an ambient light does is add a value to everything. No shadows, doesn't care, it just adds everything. So with that, for this video, that's all I'm going to show you today. It's the basis of the system. It's how to set things up and do things. I will do if anybody wants me to do a deep dive on how these lights are calculated, I'm very happy to. Let me know and I'll make some videos. The next thing I want to do is release a video that talks about USD output, but there are still some issues that I'm working through. Feel free to play with it here and use it. It'll save it to a USD file on your wherever you tell it to on your drive, and you can then load it in an engine and see how it looks. Reach out if you've got a fix for the normal problem. You'll see what I mean when you get there. But other than that, I hope that helps and you enjoy it and have a great day. I'll see you later.